Hi there, this is Marty from owingsart.com, and today we're going to take a look at these Turner Artist watercolors made by the Turner Color Works in Japan. They've been making paints and various art supplies since right about the mid 20th century, so 1947 or so, right after World War II ended, they set up their operation, and they've been in continuous business since then. You don't hear a lot about them in the United States, but they're quite popular in Japan, parts of Asia, and in the Eastern European countries, including Russia. These are widely used and marketed in those areas. But the United States, not so much here. You can get a hold of them, but like me, I had to order mine off of Amazon, and I think they shipped from Asia. Here's a few items of information about these. They come in a 12, 18, and 24 color set. The 5 milliliter, which is the small tubes, which is the ones I'll use today, and 15 milliliter tubes. One thing to note though, there's a lot of colors in the line, but only 65 of them are single pigment colors. So you'll want to be aware of that when purchasing these. And you can go to their site, and I'll put a link in the description to the site where you can go right to the color chart and see which ones are single pigment and which ones aren't. So the first thing I want to do is swatch these colors out like I do with all of the watercolors I test. And I'll in a minute or two here, I'll compare these to other watercolors, artist grade, because these state that they are artist grade watercolors. And like there are some other Japanese watercolors, the Kuretake and the Holbein artist watercolors that tend to be more opaque in nature, but I found these to be pretty transparent depending on the amount of water you use. So who are the paints named after? I think they might be named after this guy, Joseph Mallard William Turner, who was a very famous English watercolorist and painter during the 18th and 19th century. So I'll post a link up in the description to the Tate Museum where they talk about William Turner, or Joseph Turner. It's a really interesting life this guy led, and quite a prolific painter in terms of watercolor and oils and all kinds of stuff. So very interesting. I encourage you to take a look at that. So basically, in swatching these colors out, the first thing I noticed was they, like some other Japanese paints, namely the Kuretake and the Holbein, they're a little bit more on the opaque side. Now you can avoid that by wetting them down a little bit, but the one thing I really look for in like a professional grade paint is how well can you create colors from two different colors, or blending, and how they disperse and things like that. So the next thing I really wanted to try was a little wet on wet. And here, if you want to get to that color chart, I'll post this in the description. You don't need to worry about it, but just click in there and you can learn more about that. So first thing I'm going to do is wet the back of the watercolor paper here, or just wet the watercolor paper, and then just watch the paint flow out. Now I'm using a very what I'd call a juicy brush. This is an Isabe number 5. It's a really nice natural hair, I think it's a blue Siberian squirrel hair brush, so it really just soaks up all the water. And then you can see here, just wanted to see how the colors would run into each other and how well the colors just kind of mix and disperse. And I think they do pretty well. I mean, they're coming out very thin and sort of transparent here just because there's so much water in this brush that I'm using here. But I like the way they're mixing together, and the kind of color effects that you could get. You can imagine doing some skies or things like that. All right, now to take a look at how they stack up against some other popular brands of watercolor. Well, the first one up is the Schmincke, the German watercolors. I often compare watercolors to the Schmincke because they're kind of the standard for me. They're what I use every day. They're so outstanding in many characteristics that they just make for a really outstanding all-around paint. The next paint we'll look at here is the French paint, the Senneliers, which are great as well in their own right, and they have a luminosity and glow to them. They're made with honey, and so I'm never disappointed using Senneliers products. They're very high quality paints, very good, and you can feel the the craftsmanship and pride they put in the paints when you use them. So the next ones we'll take a look at here are the Holbein, which is the other Japanese, well, another Japanese manufacturer. And if you're looking for like comparisons or reviews on any of these colors that I swatch out here that I compare to, just search the channel, because I've done a review on every watercolor I make a comparison to. So these Holbein watercolors are a little bit more opaque, on the opaque side. A lot of people aren't quite used to that, so you have to let them add a little bit more water for transparency. Here's the Mission watercolor paints made in Korea. You can see how those stack up. I'd say just a slightly better transparency, and maybe not transparency, but dispersion with the Mission paints, but they're very vibrant. Now here's some American Journey watercolors that I came across recently from Cheap Joe's. You can buy some sample sets, and I use these. You can also pick these up under the Da Vinci brand. They're the same watercolors, but these are really outstanding paints, and they're paints I've recently added to my palette. So I can recommend those as well. And here is the Kuretake Gamsai Tombi paints, which you can see are a little less opaque maybe than these Turners, but still nonetheless they're pretty nice watercolors as well. I recently tested those out, and they're pretty good. So I'm just looking here at the mixes here, and you know, you can get the colors you want right out of these, no big deal. It wasn't hard at all for me, and I enjoyed that process. Here's Rembrandts made by the Royal Talens Company. The Rembrandt paints, they're really nice. I also can recommend those. Yeah, you can get a good comparison there. So we'll do a few more comparisons here to take a look at, since I know people really enjoy that and want to know how things stack up. Okay, here's some watercolor paints made in St. Petersburg, Russia. These are called White Nights. And the White Nights for me were a little bit more on the opaque side as well. And there was a certain, maybe a little bit of a graininess or granularity to those paints, as I recall. Here's the Lucas Aquarelle 1862 paints, which were very, very nice and very affordable too. I really see how the purple mixed in those. Really just was able to get a nice mix there. The green wasn't so great, but I might not have been using the right color combination there. Here's the Winsor & Newton student grade Cotman paints. You can see the pale sort of muted paint color there for those. So I don't really recommend the Cotman. I recommend more the artist watercolors for the Winsor & Newton. Now here's the Daler & Rowney Aquafine, which I do recommend. They're very nice paints. They don't really mix as well, but the colors are pretty vibrant for a very, very inexpensive paint. So that's just a few comparisons to some different watercolor paints that I've reviewed on the channel, and hopefully that's helpful to you. So next thing I do here, I think what I'll do is get right into the painting demonstration and see how they do in that aspect as well. I think daisies may be my favorite flowers to paint. I just enjoy painting daisies because they're like happy flowers, right? I don't know if that makes any sense, but they seem to be cheerful and bright, and I just like to, they're not so concerned or serious with themselves. They just kind of hang around, and they kind of smell nice and they look nice, and they're just happy. They don't have a lot of flair to them. They're simple, so they're pretty easy to draw and paint. I'm not the greatest at, like I said, I'm not a floral painter. I've mentioned that in the past, but I still have fun kind of just fooling around sketching, and that's all this is. It's just a little sketch, so just having some fun. I forget what brought it up the other day, but a commenter in one of the videos had said, I'm having a little bit of a hard time struggling with how to get started. I have a new sketchbook and some new art supplies, and sort of afraid or fearful of using them. And what I always tell people who approach me with that problem is like, don't worry about creating a masterpiece the first time out. Don't worry or be stressed out by art. That's not the purpose of art at all. I mean, you can still strive for excellence and be really committed to the craft and yet have a lot of fun, but you have to be willing to sort of set your fears aside like anything else in life and just say, I don't really care how it's going to come out, really, because you're almost always going to learn something through the process. So whether your painting or drawing or sketch is terrible, it'll teach you something. And over time, believe me when I say you cannot help but get better at it through practice and just sort of setting your fear aside. So if you have that trouble, just get started. Just the first step you take is the most important one, and that is really putting pencil or pen or paper or brush to use. Well, it's time to recognize these and give them a final rating in several areas. So, the color was good, and I like the vibrancy. It was above average. Now I'm rating these as artist grade, so I'm going to be comparing these to other artist grade paints, and the pigment was just so above average for me, but right around average. The dissolving and dispersion were above average, but just not seriously above average. Transparency, though, was what stood out in these. If I watered them down, I could get nice transparency, and I think the overall quality is good. The value, though, not the greatest for the money you're going to pay for these, probably because they have to come from so far away. So overall, I give these a 6.5, and I can recommend them. They're certainly good enough for sketching and some finished work that you may want. And here's a list of the colors in case you were wondering, so you can just take a quick note of those. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Turner Artist Watercolors made in Japan. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave me a comment. I always love to hear from you. And don't forget to share the video if it was helpful. All right, for owingsart.com, this is Marty. So long, everybody. Have a great day.